Hello dear friends, we are going to discuss a story about the aliens that the first time humanity realized they were not alone. The sky did not crack open with fire or thunder, nor did cities burn under alien assault. Instead, the stars simply rearranged themselves. Constellations that had remained unchanged for thousands of years shifted overnight, forming precise geometric patterns too deliberate to be natural. Astronomers panicked, governments went silent, and within hours, every major telescope on Earth pointed upward in quiet dread. Then came the signal, not a sound, not exactly, but a presence. It appeared simultaneously in every language, every screen, every mind capable of understanding. You are observed. The beings who sent it did not introduce themselves with names, because names implied individuality, and individuality implied limits. They had none. Humanity would later call them the Ascended, though even that word felt painfully insufficient. They were not conquerors in the traditional sense. They had no need for war. Their technology, or what passed for it, did not resemble machines. It was woven into the very fabric of existence, bending gravity, time, and matter as effortlessly as a human might breathe. Entire fleets of their constructs hovered at the edges of the solar system, not invading, not threatening, just watching. And yet, their silence carried a weight heavier than any weapon. For centuries, they had ruled the galaxy, though rule was a human simplification. They curated it. Civilizations rose and fell under their distant gaze, guided subtly, corrected when necessary, erased when inconvenient. To them, existence was not sacred, it was adjustable. At first, humanity reacted exactly as expected. Panic fractured into factions. Some worshipped the Ascended as gods, forming new religions overnight, claiming the rearranged stars were divine scripture written across the cosmos. Others saw them as existential threats and demanded immediate militarization, though deep down, even the most hardened generals knew resistance was meaningless. A species that could rewrite constellations could just as easily erase Earth without effort. Still, humanity did what it always did best: it adapted. Scientists studied the patterns in the stars. Linguists dissected the structure of the message. Philosophers argued about the nature of beings who could exist beyond limitation. Decades passed, and the Ascended did nothing. No second message, no visible movement, just observation. It was as if humanity had been placed under a microscope, every action recorded, every decision measured against some unknowable standard. Slowly, fear turned into curiosity, then curiosity into defiance. Because if there was one thing the Ascended had not accounted for, it was the uniquely stubborn nature of human existence. The refusal to accept being small. The breakthrough came from an unexpected place, not from the largest research institutions or the most powerful governments, but from a scattered network of independent thinkers, physicists, programmers, mathematicians, people who had spent their lives questioning the fundamental rules of reality itself. They noticed something others had dismissed as noise: tiny inconsistencies in physical constants. The speed of light fluctuated by infinitesimal margins. Gravity behaved slightly differently in controlled environments. Quantum probabilities skewed in patterns that shouldn't exist. At first, it was chalked up to measurement error, but the patterns persisted, and then they aligned. What these researchers discovered sent shockwaves through the scientific community. The laws of physics were not fixed. They were being adjusted, not randomly, but deliberately. Like parameters in a vast simulation, the implication was staggering. The Ascended were not just observing reality, they were editing it in real time. This revelation should have crushed humanity's spirit. Instead, it ignited something dangerous. Because if reality could be edited, then it could be understood. And if it could be understood, then perhaps it could be rewritten. The idea was absurd, reckless, bordering on suicidal, but it was also irresistible. Secret projects began forming across the globe, hidden even from governments. The goal was simple in concept, impossible in execution: to find the interface through which the Ascended manipulated existence. Years turned into decades as humanity pushed the boundaries of knowledge further than ever before. They built machines that didn't just observe particles but influenced probability itself. They created algorithms that could predict fluctuations, in reality before they happened, and slowly, piece by piece, they began to see the edges of something vast and incomprehensible, a structure beneath existence, like the hidden code of a universe that was never meant to be read. Then, one day, they touched it. It wasn't an explosion or a dramatic event. There was no warning siren, no catastrophic failure. A small team, working in complete isolation, activated a device designed to interact with the underlying framework of reality. For a fraction of a second, nothing happened. Then one of the researchers noticed something impossible. A pen rolling off a table stopped mid-air and hung there, unmoving, unaffected by gravity. Time did not freeze. The world outside continued, but within that room, something had changed. The rules were no longer absolute. They had been bypassed. The team stared in stunned silence as the pen slowly drifted upward instead of falling. It was a tiny defiance of physics, almost laughably insignificant compared to the power of the Ascended. But it proved something monumental. Humans could interfere. They could reach into the same layer of existence that the Ascended controlled. And in that moment, without fully understanding the consequences, humanity took its first step toward something far greater than survival. They stepped toward becoming a problem the gods themselves had never anticipated. Uncertainty spread through the fabric of existence like a fracture racing through glass. Invisible at first, but unstoppable once it began, the Ascended, who had existed beyond doubt for eons, found themselves facing something they could not immediately correct. Their adjustments grew harsher, more aggressive. But each attempt to stabilize reality only created new distortions elsewhere. It was as if the system itself was resisting their control, reacting unpredictably to the presence of human interference. Entire star systems began to behave erratically, planets drifting out of orbit, time loops forming and collapsing, light bending into impossible angles. The galaxy, once a perfectly curated construct, was slipping into chaos, and at the center of it all was Earth, no longer just a primitive world, but a growing epicenter of disruption. The breakers evolved rapidly under pressure. What had once taken months of training now happened instinctively in moments of crisis. They no longer needed controlled environments or precise calculations. They felt reality the way a musician feels rhythm, the way a predator senses movement. Some could anchor entire cities against gravitational collapse, while others could isolate pockets of time, slowing or accelerating events just enough to prevent catastrophe. But with that power came a cost. The more they interacted with the underlying structure of existence, the less tethered they became to normal human perception. Memories blurred, identities fractured, and some breakers simply dissolved into abstract phenomena, no longer people, but lingering influences that continued to affect reality long after their physical forms were gone. Humanity was changing, not just technologically, but fundamentally. The Ascended escalated again, but this time, their actions revealed something unexpected. They were not as unified as humanity had assumed. For the first time, conflicting patterns appeared in the sky, overlapping signals, contradictory adjustments, areas where reality seemed to be pulled in different directions at once. It became clear that the Ascended were not a singular consciousness, but a collective, and now, that collective was divided. Some continued attempting to erase humanity, viewing them as a critical flaw in the system. Others hesitated, whether out of curiosity, caution, or something resembling respect. They began to observe differently, less like overseers, more like analysts confronting a problem they didn't fully understand. That hesitation created gaps, and humanity exploited every single one. A coordinated effort emerged, not through governments or institutions, but through the breakers themselves. They began targeting the deeper layer of existence directly, not just bending local rules, but interfering with the mechanisms the Ascended used to enforce them. It wasn't destruction in any conventional sense. It was disruption, introducing contradictions, forcing the system to process conflicting states simultaneously. A star would exist and not exist. A moment would happen and not happen. These paradoxes didn't just confuse the system, they strained it. The Ascended responded with overwhelming force, attempting to overwrite entire regions of space at once. But the paradoxes spread faster than they could be contained. Reality was no longer a stable framework. It was becoming a battlefield of competing definitions. And then came the first true fracture. It began as a ripple, barely detectable even to the most sensitive instruments. Then it expanded, tearing through space not as an explosion, but as a separation. Two versions of reality began to diverge from a single point, like a path splitting into two incompatible directions. In one, the ascended maintained control, successfully erasing the anomalies and restoring order. In the other, humanity's interference persisted, continuing to destabilize the system. For a brief, incomprehensible moment, both realities existed, simultaneously overlapping, conflicting. Then they collided. The result was catastrophic. Entire sections of the galaxy vanished, not destroyed, but removed, as if the universe itself had rejected the contradiction. The scale of it was beyond anything humanity had imagined. This wasn't just a war within reality anymore, that it was a war over which reality would exist. The breakers felt it immediately, a pressure not physical, but conceptual, as if existence itself was struggling to decide what it should be. Some collapsed under the strain, unable to process the conflicting states. Others adapted, pushing deeper than ever before, reaching into the fracture itself, and within it, they glimpsed something even the Ascended had never intended to reveal: a layer beneath. The layer, a foundation so fundamental it made everything else seem superficial. It wasn't just code or structure, it was possibility itself, raw and undefined. The Ascended hadn't created reality. They had only shaped it, controlled it, limited it. But beneath their control was something far older, far more powerful, and humanity had just found it. The Ascended reacted with something that had never been observed before in their kind. Not anger, not correction, fear, because for the first time, they understood what humanity was becoming. Not a rival, not a threat, but something far worse. Something that didn't just live within reality, something that could decide what reality was. The moment humanity crossed that invisible boundary, the universe noticed, not in the way storms announce themselves or stars collapse in brilliance, but in something far subtler and far more terrifying. The silence of the Ascended broke. For the first time since their arrival, the patterns in the sky shifted again, not into elegant geometry, but into something jagged, unstable, almost reactive. Across every screen and every mind, the presence returned, heavier now, sharpened. With intent, cease. It was not a request. Entire research facilities shut down instantly as power failed in ways that defied engineering logic. Data corrupted itself mid-calculation. Machines that had taken decades to build unraveled into uselessness within seconds, their internal structures rewritten at a molecular level. The Ascended had noticed the interference, and unlike before, they were no longer content to simply observe. Humanity had crossed from curiosity into anomaly, and anomalies in a curated universe were not tolerated. But the damage, if it could be called that, was already done. The knowledge could not be erased. Not completely. The idea had spread too far, too fast. Hidden backups, decentralized networks, even fragments memorized by individuals ensured that the breakthrough survived the purge. Humanity, for the first time, was not reacting, they were anticipating. The next generation of experiments became quieter, more careful, less reliant on physical systems that could be easily destroyed. Instead, they moved toward something more abstract, thought itself. If the Ascended manipulated reality through some fundamental layer, then perhaps consciousness already entangled with quantum uncertainty could serve as a bridge. It sounded like madness, but then again, so had the idea of rewriting physics. Volunteers stepped forward, fully aware they might lose their minds or worse, lose their place in existence entirely. The experiments began not with machines, but with perception. At first, the results were inconsistent. Subjects reported strange distortions, colors that didn't exist, sounds that had no source, moments where cause and effect seemed reversed. Most of it was dismissed as neurological strain, until one subject, a quiet mathematician with no prior anomalies, described something different. He claimed he could see edges, not physical boundaries, but limits in how reality behaved. And more importantly, he claimed those edges could be pushed under controlled conditions. He demonstrated it. A sealed glass container, completely isolated, developed a crack without any applied force. Instruments confirmed there was no pressure, no thermal change, no structural weakness. It simply broke. Not because of energy, but because the probability of it remaining intact had been altered. The room went silent. This wasn't technology. This wasn't even physics anymore. This was intent interacting directly with reality. Words spread through the hidden networks like wildfire. Humanity no longer needed to fully understand the system, they just needed to interfere with it. Training programs began, not for soldiers or scientists, but for individuals capable of perceiving and manipulating these edges. They weren't called operators or engineers. They were called breakers. At first, their abilities were small, barely noticeable, a coin landing on its edge instead of heads or tails, a flickering light stabilizing against all electrical logic. But with practice, the effects grew stronger. Localized gravity distortions, time delays measurable in microseconds, objects behaving in ways that defied every known law. Humanity was no longer just studying the rules, they were bending them. And bending them meant one thing: they were becoming visible. The Ascended responded not with anger, but with correction. Entire regions of space began to reset, not destroyed, rewritten. Colonies beyond Earth vanished without explosion or trace, replaced by empty space as if they had never existed. Historical records altered themselves, erasing those places from memory and data alike. It was a clean, precise form of control. To the Ascended, this was maintenance. Remove the anomaly, restore balance, continue observation. But something unexpected happened. The breakers remembered, even when reality itself insisted those colonies had never been there. The breakers retained fragments, echoes that refused to disappear. It was as if once a mind had touched the deeper layer of existence, it became partially immune to its rewriting. That was the moment everything changed. Because now humanity possessed something the Ascended had never encountered before: resistance. Not through force, but through persistence of awareness. And for the first time in their long, unchallenged dominion, the Ascended made a mistake. They escalated. Instead of subtle corrections, they acted directly on Earth. The sky fractured not physically, but perceptually. People across the planet saw overlapping versions of reality bleeding into one another. Cities flickered between states that had never existed. Oceans froze and burned in the same moment. Gravity shifted unpredictably, pulling and releasing without warning. It was no longer a quiet containment. It was a system attempting to overwrite a problem too deeply embedded to remove cleanly. Panic erupted worldwide, but beneath it, something else grew: defiance. Because now everyone could see it. Reality wasn't sacred. It wasn't fixed. It was being controlled. And if it could be controlled, it could be fought. The breakers stepped forward, no longer hidden, no longer experimental. They spread across the globe, anchoring fragments of stability where they could, pushing back against the distortions, holding reality together in small, fragile pockets. It was messy, imperfect, and often fatal. Many of them simply disappeared mid-action, erased or overwritten beyond recovery. But each moment they resisted proved something the Ascended had never needed to consider. The system wasn't flawless. It could be strained, it could be challenged, and most dangerously of all, it could be broken. Humanity had stopped being a subject of observation. They had become interference, and in doing so, they forced the gods of the universe into something they had never experienced before: uncertainty. The moment humanity touched that deeper layer, everything changed in a way that could no longer be measured by time, space, or even cause and effect. The breakers who reached into it didn't just manipulate reality, they began to detach from it. Their thoughts no longer followed sequence. Their awareness expanded outward, no longer confined to a single body, a single moment, or a single version of existence. They could see probabilities before they formed, outcomes before decisions were made. And more importantly, they could choose between them, not by calculation, not by force, but by intention alone. The universe, once a rigid structure curated by the Ascended, revealed itself as something fluid beneath the surface, something that could be shaped by will if one knew where to press. Humanity had stopped bending reality. They had begun selecting it. This was the breaking point the Ascended had feared without ever naming it. For eons, they had maintained control by ensuring that reality followed consistent rules, predictable, stable, manageable. Their power came not from raw strength, but from absolute certainty. They knew how everything would behave because they had defined how everything could behave. But now, that certainty was gone. The breakers were not just introducing chaos, they were introducing choice into a system that had been designed to eliminate it. And choice, when applied at the level of existence itself, was not just unpredictable, it was uncontrollable. The Ascended could overwrite events, erase anomalies, even reset entire regions of space. But they could not overwrite a decision that had not yet been made. And humanity was learning to exist in that exact space between what was and what could be. The conflict shifted again, but this time, it no longer resembled anything that could be called a battle. There were no fronts, no strategies, no clear victories or losses. Instead, there were competing versions of reality, constantly forming and collapsing as both sides attempted to assert their definition of existence. In one moment, a city would stand intact, its people unaware of any conflict. In the next, that same city would flicker into a version where it had never been built. Sometimes both versions existed at once, overlapping in ways that made perception itself unreliable. People began to experience multiple lifetimes in fragments, memories of events that had never happened, emotions tied to outcomes that no longer existed. Humanity was not just fighting for survival anymore. They were fighting for coherence. And yet, in the middle of that instability, something remarkable emerged. Instead of collapsing under the pressure, humanity adapted. Not just the breakers, but ordinary people as well. They began to accept the fluidity, to live with the contradictions instead of resisting them. Culture shifted. Language evolved to describe things that had no fixed state. Identity itself became flexible, no longer tied to a single continuous existence. It was messy, disorienting, often painful, but it worked. Where the Ascended relied on stability, humanity thrived in change. The more the system fractured, the more room humans found to exist within those fractures. They weren't just surviving the collapse of fixed reality. They were learning how to move through it. The Ascended, however, could not adapt in the same way. Their entire existence was built on control, on maintaining a consistent framework. Without it, they began to lose cohesion. The divisions within their collective grew deeper, no longer subtle disagreements, but outright contradictions. Some attempted to reinforce the old structure at any cost, pouring immense effort into restoring stability. Others began to withdraw, observing rather than interfering, as if trying to understand what humanity had become. And a few did something unthinkable. They changed, not fully, not completely, but enough to begin interacting with reality the way humans did, less like architects, more like participants. It was a slow, uneven shift, but it marked the first time the Ascended were influenced by something outside themselves. Then came the moment that redefined everything. A single breaker no one ever agreed on who, or even if it had once been just one person, reached deeper than anyone before. Not into the layer the Ascended controlled, not even into the foundation beneath it, but beyond both, into something that could not be described as a layer at all. It was not structure, it was not possibility, it was the absence of limitation entirely. And from that place, the breaker did something no being had ever done. They didn't change reality. They removed the need for it to be consistent. For an instant that stretched beyond time, the universe existed without rules, not broken rules, not bent rules, no rules at all. Cause and effect dissolved. Space and time lost meaning. Existence became pure expression, unbound and undefined. It should have been the end of everything, total collapse, absolute void. But it wasn't, because within that limitless state, humanity did something the Ascended could never have predicted. They chose, not collectively, not perfectly, but enough individuals, enough minds, enough fragments of will reached into that boundless state and began shaping it, not back into what it was, but into something new, something flexible, something alive, a reality that didn't depend on strict laws to function, but on the continuous interaction of those within it. It wasn't stable in the old sense. but it was sustainable, and more importantly, it was free. When the universe settled, if it could even be called settling, the Ascended found themselves in a position they had never occupied before. They were no longer above reality, they were within it, subject to the same fluidity, the same uncertainty as everything else. Their control was gone, not destroyed, but made irrelevant. They could still influence, still shape, but no more than any other sufficiently aware being, humanity. The species they had once observed as primitive and insignificant had done the impossible. They hadn't defeated the gods. They had made gods unnecessary. In the aftermath, if it could even be called an aftermath, the universe no longer resembled something that could be mapped, measured, or fully understood. There were still stars, still planets, still vast stretches of space, but none of them were fixed in the way they once had been. Constellations drifted slowly, not randomly, but as if guided by a quiet, collective intention. Some regions of existence felt stable, almost like echoes of the old universe, while others shifted constantly, reshaping themselves in response to the beings within them. Time no longer moved in a single direction. For some, it flowed forward, as it always had, while for others, it looped, branched, or unfolded in ways that defied sequence. And yet, despite all of it, despite the loss of certainty, the collapse of rigid laws, life continued. Not just continued, it flourished. Humanity was no longer confined to one form, one world, or even one definition. Some chose to remain as they were, living on Earth or worlds like it, holding onto the familiarity of gravity, sky, and linear time. Others became something more abstract, entities that existed across multiple moments at once, or beings that shaped entire environments. Through thought and perception, there were those who explored the deeper layers, not to control them, but to understand them, to experience the raw, limitless nature of existence itself. There was no single path anymore, no universal standard. Every choice created a new way of being, and somehow, through all that diversity, a strange kind of harmony emerged, not enforced, not designed, but naturally formed through the interaction of countless independent wills. The Ascended did not vanish, they remained, but they were no longer what they had been. Stripped of their absolute control, they faced something entirely new, existence without certainty. Some struggled with it, clinging to fragments of the old structure, trying to impose order where none was required. Others adapted slowly, learning from the very species they had once dismissed. They began to experience reality instead of dictating it, to make choices instead of executing corrections. It was an unfamiliar, often uncomfortable process, but it was also something they had never truly had before: freedom. In a way, humanity had not just changed the universe, they had changed the Ascended as well. Stories of the old era became something like myths, tales of a time when reality was fixed, when the stars obeyed strict laws, when a distant, godlike presence curated existence from above. To new generations, it sounded almost impossible, like a simplified version of a far more complex truth. The idea that everything once followed unbreakable rules felt limiting, and yet, those stories were remembered not out of nostalgia, but as a reminder of what had been overcome. Humanity had not risen by becoming stronger in the traditional sense. They had risen by refusing to accept that the limits placed on them were absolute. And somewhere, in the shifting, living fabric of this new universe, there were still echoes of the moment everything changed. Not a place, not a time, but a kind of memory woven into existence itself. The instant when a species once considered insignificant reached beyond its boundaries and touched something infinite. Some said you could still feel it if you went deep enough into the layers beneath reality. A faint impression of countless minds choosing, all at once, to define something that had never needed definition before. Not control, not perfection, just possibility. And that was the final truth the Ascended came to understand. They had spent eternity believing that power meant shaping reality into something stable, something predictable, something complete. But humanity had shown them something far greater. That true power was allowing reality to never be finished,